the two of us, before we set off for our respective families' homes in Texas and Oklahoma. The night we trimmed the tree was very special. We had a glass of wine, a fire, soft Christmas music, and we took turns opening our gifts. I couldn't wait to give Narvel my presents, but he insisted, "You go first." He handed me a big box. Inside it was an igloo ice chest, and at the bottom were a couple of telephone books. I was pretty confused until I saw the note that read, "This one isn't it. Go to the next one." Narvel opened my first gift to him, a cellular phone, and then it was my turn again. I got another large box and another note. We kept taking turns until finally I opened a box that had a smaller box inside. Within that one was a smaller box, then another and another. The smallest box held a beautiful Marquise diamond engagement ring. What a romantic way to propose. When this man wants to do a production, he does a production. By January of 1989, we were talking about buying some property. I wanted acreage and Narvel wanted by the water. Linda DeMith was my hairdresser at the time, and I figured hairdressers knew everyone, so I asked her about it. It only took her about half an hour to come up with a lead in Gallatin, a suburb of Nashville. Narvel and I drove out late that afternoon to see the place. Things didn't look promising, and then suddenly a 4-story red brick house rose up in front of us. It overlooked the Cumberland River and was surrounded by giant oaks. By the time we finished looking, we were in love with the place, and when our realtor told us we could get the 2 adjoining tracts of land, we were sold. There was a lot of remodeling needed, so we couldn't move in it for almost a year. But they gave us time to find furniture that we really liked. It was the one and only house Narvel and I looked at. When I saw the house finished, with its red bricks painted with the soft buttercup yellow we'd chosen, I cried. I just loved it. Around this time, I got the chance to live out one of my wildest dreams, to star in a movie. Of course, I'd been acting in my videos for 5 years and on a number of television specials, but this was my first shot at the big screen. Tremors was a science fiction horror film, only funny. It was pretty rough filming in the desert, but the movie had an interesting story and the cast was great. Besides Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward, it featured Finn Carter and Michael Gross, who played my husband. As Richard Schickel said in Time magazine, it's in the tradition of the 50s horror movies. Tremors is bound to become a classic. Not a bad way to launch a movie career. I don't know that Narvel and I really would have ever gotten married if I didn't have such a strong urge to have a baby. Up until then, I had reconciled myself that I would never have a child. That was because of Charlie. Charlie had his 2 boys from a previous marriage, and he wasn't about to make a place for kids in our life. "If you have children, you don't sing," Charlie had told me. "I'm not going to be stuck cleaning shitty diapers while you're off on the road." But my relationship with Narvel was so different, and I found myself longing to have a baby with him. And so finally, Narvel and I began to talk seriously about marriage. After my first week of shooting Tremors, he came out to meet me in Southern California. I toured on weekends throughout the shooting, and he planned to accompany me to our concert date. So while we were sitting in the Los Angeles airport, Narvel asked me, "What do you think about us getting married in Lake Tahoe?" I loved the idea. The week before the wedding, Mama flew out to be with me on the movie set. Then Mama and I drove into Lake Tahoe to meet Narvel, while our families arrived later that night, having flown into Reno. I had been booked to perform at Caesar's Palace, and they all came to watch the show. Then the next afternoon at 2 o'clock, we all boarded a bus and went to Zephyr's Cove, loaded onto a catamaran, and crossed the lake to Emerald Bay. Although it was the 3rd of June, it was so cold you would have thought it was the middle of November. I wore a simple white cotton long-sleeved summer dress. The sun came out as Narvel and I said our wedding vows on Lake Tahoe's beautiful Emerald Bay. If you ever get the chance, go see it. After I finished filming Tremors, we were off to Cancun, Mexico for our honeymoon. I'd always heard that you shouldn't drink the water south of the border, so we tried to be very careful with Narvel drinking Diet Coke and me drinking bottled water. But one night, we went out to a show, and we both had a margarita. Later that night, I started feeling real queasy, and I figured that the ice in the margarita was to blame. Even the thought of food made me ill, which was very unusual for me. I'm almost always hungry. When my stomach trouble persisted, we decided it would be best to cut our trip short and return back to the States. Back home in Nashville, I discovered that I wasn't suffering from Montezuma's revenge after all. I'll never forget my excitement when, sitting on the edge of the bathtub in our condominium, I saw the little white dot on the home pregnancy tester turn bright pink. I was pregnant deader'n a hammer. There was no doubt about it. And that afternoon, as we were flying out to do a show, I called Mama from a payphone at the Nashville airport to tell her I was pregnant. She was thrilled, of course, and so was Gloria, Narvel's mama. Both mothers agreed not to spread the news for a while so we could have the chance to tell all of our people personally. Also, I wanted to make sure everything was okay before we announced my pregnancy. I was 34 at the time. Later, I was shocked to see my picture on the 10 o'clock news and to hear the broadcaster say that I was going to have a baby. I didn't like the invasion of privacy, of course, but I mostly resented losing the chance to announce the upcoming birth of my first child myself. Still, the news leak was just a small cloud on our joy. I loved being pregnant, every bit of it. I continued to tour for the rest of 1989 and finished on December the 3rd in Orlando, Florida. When I got back to Nashville on December the 4th and went in for my regular prenatal exam, my doctor, Dr. John Van Hooydonk, told me my cervix had thinned considerably. Although my due date was March the 8th, more than 3 months away, I was already having minor contractions. Eventually, even with all my precautions, I was put into the hospital twice. After my second admission, they sent me home with a little syringe, activated by a pump I carried in my shirt pocket, which was attached to a tube that ran into my stomach. It would pump a small amount of medicine into my stomach to stop the contractions. Then, every 3 days, I had to go to the doctor's office where nurses would change the needle in my stomach. It was a painful ritual, but I would have hung by my toes from the ceiling if it had meant having a healthy child. Staying in bed all that time did have two positive effects. One, it gave me the chance to listen to my intuition, because I had been having that feeling again. I had to find a way to tell Jimmy Bowen, the president of my record label, with whom I'd had the biggest recording success of my career, that I wanted another producer. So I just came right out and told him, I think we've been together long enough. I think I need to get someone different to produce me. I agree with you 100%, he said, and I'll work to find you another producer. That's all the discussion we had. It was that quick and that easy. I eventually chose Tony Brown, with whom I would record Rumor Has It in 1990, For My Broken Heart in 1991, It's Your Call in 1992, and The Greatest Hits Volume 2 in 1993. Each album has sold more than 2 million copies, and each continues to sell. The feeling had steered me right again. The second positive effect was that I had a lot of time on my hands to listen for great songs. That's also the time I met Linda Davis. On Thursday, February the 23rd, my water broke. As Narvel and I set out on the 35-mile trip to Nashville's West Side Hospital, I started getting really strong contractions. When we hit the interstate, Narvel was driving more than 100 miles per hour, talking on the car phone to my mama, his parents, and then his children. I was admitted to the hospital at 10 p.m. Then I was put into bed. I had my baby in that same bed, in the same room, and didn't leave it for 2 days. Dr. Van Hooydonk arrived and did an examination. This is it, he said. You're really pretty far along. Then he turned to Narvel and said, let's go have a Coke. It'll be at least 5 hours before the baby's born. Right before he left with Narvel, Dr. Van Hooydonk tapped my foot. Hold off on the drugs as long as you can, he said. Just then another hard contraction hit me, and I'm not the least bit ashamed to report that I said, ladies, bring on the drugs, just as the door shut behind Dr. Van Hooydonk. I figure every woman has her own threshold for pain, and mine's pretty high. But this was no time to be a martyr. I wouldn't be ready to give birth until 4 a.m. Then the room was filled with nurses, and it was getting really serious. But the baby wouldn't come out. His shoulders were hung on my pelvis bone. Then exactly at 5:04 a.m. on Friday, February the 23rd, our son was born. I was overcome with joy and began praising and thanking God for my beautiful baby boy. I've seen my name in letters as tall as a house. I've won virtually every major award my career offers. I say all of that simply to say this: I've never been as fulfilled as I was when my son was born. We named him Shelby Stephen McEntire Blackstock. Shelby, after Narvel's paternal grandpa. Shelby Herschel Blackstock. Stephen, after my paternal great-grandfather, Clark Stephen McEntire. McEntire after me, and Blackstock after Narvel. That's a mouthful for a little boy. Ever since the first moment of Shelby's life, I've hated to be separated from him. But as much as I enjoyed staying home for a while, I knew I'd have to go back to work pretty soon. I'd taken off December, January, February, and in March, then in April I recorded my first LP with Tony Brown, and we put the 1990 show together. We went back out on the road in May. Shelby was too tiny and fragile to come along then, so we found him a wonderful nanny, Cindy Bailey. I know Shelby's always been in good hands.